I caught my sister-in-law telling her mom, I wish she'd just disappear. Her mother nodded. Soon, very soon. My 7-year-old niece overheard. Her face went pale. I didn't react, but I prepared. Days later, the police knocked on our door. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Daniel Cole had not slept well since the day they buried his brother. That was 4 months ago now, and the Ashford house, a 2-story colonial on Ferris Lane, painted a pale blue that had faded to something closer to gray over the years, had never felt right to him after that. He had stood at the graveside in February cold, watched them lower Darren into the ground, and told himself what the doctors had told everyone else. Heart attack. Sudden. Tragic. Nothing anyone could have done. He had tried to believe it. He could not. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and something faintly sweet that Daniel had never been able to identify. He had moved in 3 weeks after the funeral, carrying 2 duffel bags and a box of books up the narrow staircase, while Zoe watched from the kitchen doorway with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. You really don't have to do this, she had said. I want to be close to Aaron, Daniel had answered. That much was true. His niece was 7 years old and had stopped talking in full sentences since the funeral. She sat in corners with picture books open on her lap, staring at the pages without turning them. She ate her meals quietly, said please and thank you in a small, careful voice, and flinched whenever a door closed too hard. She was not a broken child. Not yet, but she was a child walking very carefully, the way people walk on ice they are not sure will hold them. Daniel watched her, and he watched Zoe. Zoe Holt was 34, dark-haired, and composed in the way that some people are composed, not because they have found peace, but because they have decided not to let their face show what lives underneath. She went to yoga on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She kept the house spotless. She answered condolence calls with a low, steady voice and the right words in the right order. She did not cry much, not in front of Daniel, not in front of anyone he could see. The life insurance had paid out within 60 days. A significant sum, more than enough to cover the mortgage, the car, the utilities, and still leave a comfortable balance in the account. Daniel knew this because Darren had told him about the policy 2 years before he died. His brother had been thorough that way. He planned for things. He believed in taking care of the people he loved. He had trusted Zoe with all of it. What troubled Daniel was not the money itself. It was the way Zoe did not seem relieved by it, the way a person might be relieved when financial pressure lifts after a loss. She seemed satisfied. There was a difference, and Daniel felt it in his chest every time he sat across from her at the kitchen table. Darren had been a good man, an electrician who had built his own small business in Ashford from nothing, who called their mother every Sunday morning, who coached Aaron's t-ball team even though, by his own admission, he knew nothing about baseball. He had been healthy, active. He ran 3 miles every other morning and cooked most of the family's meals because he liked to. He was the kind of person who actually showed up when someone needed him, who remembered details about people's lives because he was genuinely interested. The kind of man that the world does not have enough of. A heart attack at 38 made no sense. The doctors had said it was genetic, a hidden defect, they called it, something that can go undetected for years. Daniel had asked questions. He had read the paperwork. He had nodded along at all the right moments. And he had gone home afterward and sat in his own apartment and stared at the wall for a long time. He kept coming back to the same things. Darren had run a half marathon the previous spring. He ate well, slept enough, had a physical every year with Dr. Fallon, and came home with clean results every time. There was no family history of cardiac events. Their father was 68 and still working a garden every morning. Their mother, when she heard the diagnosis, had said the same thing Daniel was thinking. That doesn't sound right. She had said it quietly, alone with Daniel in the hospital corridor, and then she had not said it again. Grief had taken over. There was no space left for questions. But Daniel was not done asking them. Aaron was different around Zoe than she was around Daniel. Around him, she occasionally laughed, a small, rusty sound like a door that had not been opened in a while. She showed him drawings. She asked him questions about her father, and he answered them as honestly and gently as he could. But around Zoe, Aaron became very still, very quiet, and Zoe, for her part, treated her daughter with the kind of patience that was not patience at all. It was tolerance and not very much of it. "Stop hovering," Zoe said one morning when Erin stood near the kitchen counter, watching her mother make coffee. Erin took a step back. "Sorry, just go find something to do. I'm busy. Can I help?" Zoe set down the mug with a sharp click against the granite. "Erin, room. Now." The girl went. She did not run. She walked with her arms close to her body and her eyes on the floor. And Daniel, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee he no longer wanted, watched her go and felt something cold move through him. He did not say anything. He was learning to be patient, learning to watch and wait before he moved. But the watching was getting harder every day. There were small things that built up over time. A week into his stay, he had found Erin sitting on the floor of her room at 9 at night, still in her school clothes, with a granola bar wrapper beside her. When he knocked and pushed the door open, she looked up at him with a calm that was clearly practiced. She said she had forgotten to eat dinner. He went to the kitchen and made her a proper plate and brought it to her room, and she ate it carefully without a word. When he checked the refrigerator later, there was food. Zoe had simply not called her. Another time, he came home from hardware store run to find Erin alone in the backyard in the early April cold, sitting on the back step without a coat. He asked where her mother was. "Upstairs," Erin said on the phone. She had been outside for almost an hour. He brought her in, made hot chocolate, and said nothing. He filed each thing away. He did not react. He paid attention. Something was wrong. He could feel it the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive, a pressure or wrongness in the air. He did not know yet how deep it went. It was a Thursday evening in late March. The day had been ordinary in the particular way that days in that house were ordinary, low and quiet and slightly watchful. Erin had come home from school, eaten a snack at the table while doing her reading assignment, and gone to her room by 4:30. Zoe had been on the phone twice before dinner and had barely spoken at the table. After the dishes were cleared, she retreated to the living room with her phone and a glass of water, and Daniel had gone upstairs to read. He had been in the upstairs hallway, returning a book to the shelf near the bathroom, when he heard Zoe's voice drifting up from the kitchen below. She was on the phone. The house's open staircase carried sound like a channel, and he stopped where he was, one hand still on the bookshelf, and listened without meaning to. "I can't keep doing this," Zoe said. Her voice was low, but not a whisper. The voice of someone who believed they were alone. There was a pause. "She's just there, always there, every time I turn around." Another pause, longer this time. "If she wasn't here, things would be easier. I could finally move on." Daniel did not move. He stood with his hand on the bookshelf and felt the air in the hallway change. A voice came through the phone, faint but audible. An older woman's voice. Zoe's mother, Renata, who lived 3 towns over and called twice a week and had never once, in all the months since Darren's death, asked Daniel how he was doing. "You get the rest of the money too, right?" Renata said, and Zoe, without a pause, without a breath of hesitation, "Yes." Daniel lowered his hand slowly from the bookshelf. His heartbeat was steady. His hands were still. He was the kind of man who had learned, through years of keeping watch over a younger brother and then a small family, to hold himself together when every instinct told him to react. He did not go downstairs. He did not call out. He did not make a sound. He went back to his room and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time. The conversation replayed in his head with perfect clarity. Not the emotional weight of it that he was setting aside for later, storing it somewhere cool and separate, but the structure of it, the logic. "She's just there. If she wasn't here, you get the rest of the money." And the way Renata had asked it, not with surprise or discomfort, with the flat certainty of someone who already knew the answer. A mother and daughter who had already discussed this, who had already decided something. He thought about Darren. He thought about the trust fund, about Zoe's satisfaction at the payout. He thought about Erin, alone in the backyard without a coat. He thought about the way the word rest had landed in Renata's question. Not the money, not Darren's money. The rest. As if this was one installment in a transaction that had already begun. He thought about his brother at 38, dead in a hospital bed after a morning that started like any other. He thought, what if it did not start like any other? He turned on the lamp on his nightstand. He pulled a small notebook from the drawer and clicked open a pen. He wrote 2 words at the top of the page. Pay attention. Then he closed the notebook and held it in his hand until he was ready to sleep. He did not sleep well that night, but he slept. He would need the rest. 3 nights after that, at 10:15, Daniel heard a soft sound in the hallway. He was still awake. He had been reading or trying the same paragraph for the 4th time when the sound came. Not a knock, just a presence. A small weight of someone standing close to a door. He got up quietly and opened it. Erin stood in the hallway in her pajamas. They were the ones with small yellow stars on them that Darren had bought her last Christmas. She was holding the sleeve of one arm with her opposite hand, the way children hold themselves when they're trying not to seem scared. Her feet were bare on the hallway floor, and she had not combed her hair before bed, so it stood out slightly on one side. She looked very young and very alert at the same time. "Uncle Daniel," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. In the low light from his room, her face looked older than 7. There was something in her eyes, not quite fear, not quite understanding, but something in between. Awareness. The awareness of a child who has been paying attention, who has been absorbing things she does not have the words for yet. "Hey," Daniel said, soft. He opened the door wider. "Come in." She stepped inside. He pulled out the chair from a small desk and sat down, so he was at her level. She stood in the center of the room for a moment, then sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "What's going on, Bug?" he said. She looked at the floor. "Mom said I might go away." Daniel kept his face still. "What do you mean?" She said maybe I'd go somewhere else. "Like far?" "To a different place." "Did she say where?" Erin shook her head. She picked at the seam of her pajama sleeve with one finger. She said she was still figuring it out, but she said it like it was already decided. You know how she says stuff like that? "Yeah," Daniel said. "I know." Erin looked up at him then, and for just a second her composure cracked, and he saw all of it. The fear she had been carrying, the weight of it on a 7-year-old's frame. She had been holding it together, the way she had been holding everything together since February. She was remarkably good at it for someone her age. Her father's daughter, through and through. "I don't want to go," she whispered. Daniel leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees, keeping his voice quiet and steady. "You're not going anywhere. You hear me?" But she said, "I heard you. And I'm telling you, you are not going anywhere." He held her gaze until she held his. "I promise you that." "Okay." Erin looked at him for a long moment. She searched his face the way children do when they are trying to decide if an adult is telling the truth or just saying the thing they are supposed to say. Then she nodded, a small, careful nod, like she was deciding to believe him and had just barely landed on yes. "Okay," she said. He walked her back to her room. He stood in her doorway until she was settled under the covers, her stuffed rabbit tucked against her side, her hair still standing up on one side. He adjusted the blanket. She let him. He turned off the lamp on her nightstand and stood in the dark for a moment, listening to her breathe. "Uncle Daniel," she said in the dark. "Yeah. You're not going to leave, right?" He kept his voice level. "I'm not going anywhere." She said nothing else. He pulled her door gently closed and stood in the hallway. He stood there for a long time. He had been watching. He had been cautious. He had been telling himself to wait until he had more information, to be sure, to be careful. He had told himself that what he had heard might be nothing. A frustrated woman venting to her mother, a conversation that sounded worse than it was. He was done telling himself that. This was not just resentment. This was not just a woman struggling with grief and the demands of raising a child she had not expected to raise alone. Erin had been told she was going somewhere far. Zoe had told her this in a tone that said the decision was already made. And $400,000 was sitting in a trust fund that would transfer the moment that child was removed from her mother's care. That was not a frustrated woman venting. That was planning. Daniel went back to his room. He sat at his desk and opened the notebook. Below the 2 words he had written before, he began a list. He wrote until his hand cramped and the room had gone cold, and the clock on his phone read past midnight. He did not stop until he had filled 3 pages. Daniel was methodical by nature. It was a quality his mother had always called his most useful and least lovable trait. He could take emotion out of a problem the way a surgeon removes something from a body, set it aside, and work with clean hands. He had needed that quality all his life. He needed it now more than he ever had. He started with the paperwork. Over the following week, while Zoe was at yoga or out running errands, and Aaron was at school, Daniel went through every document he could find in the house. Darren had been organized, binders on the shelf in the home office, labeled in his neat, slanted handwriting. Insurance, property, financial planning, trust, Yem Holt. That last one was the one Daniel sat with for the longest time. The trust fund had been established when Aaron was born. Darren had been thorough about it, typical of the man he was. The fund held a portion of the life insurance payout, designated for Aaron's education and future needs, and was to remain under Zoe's management as the surviving parent and legal guardian. It was a careful, loving document, the product of an afternoon that Darren had probably spent anxious and second-guessing himself, the way he always did when he was trying to get something right. Daniel could picture him sitting at this same desk, reading the draft over and over, wanting to make sure Aaron was protected no matter what. He had not protected her, but there was a clause. Daniel read it 3 times. In the event that Aaron was no longer in Zoe's care, through adoption, institutionalization, voluntary relinquishment, or any other legal mechanism, the remaining funds would revert entirely to Zoe. Not to Aaron, not to a new guardian, not to a trust for her benefit. To Zoe. Daniel set the binder down on the desk and sat very still. It was the kind of clause that could exist in a document drafted quickly or drafted by a lawyer who had not thought through all its implications. Darren had likely not read it as anything dangerous. He had trusted Zoe completely. He had seen the clause as an administrative catch-all, a line to prevent complications in some hypothetical scenario he never seriously imagined. But Zoe had likely read it very carefully, and so, perhaps, had her mother. The numbers were not small. After the initial payouts, Aaron's portion of the trust still held a balance close to $400,000. That was 400,000 reasons to find a way to remove a 7-year-old child from her mother's care, legally, cleanly, on paper. No violence required. Just paperwork. Daniel photographed every page of the document with his phone. He emailed the photos to himself and to a separate account he had set up the previous day, one that had nothing to do with his regular address. Then he replaced the binder on the shelf in precisely the position he had found it. He also went through the property documents. He found 2 real estate printouts that had been folded and slipped into the back of the property binder, listings for townhouses in a suburb of Columbus. Both had notes in Zoe's handwriting in the margins. One word, circled, deposit. She had been making plans for a long time. He sat at the kitchen table that afternoon with a coffee he did not drink and added to the list in his notebook. Financial motive, trust clause, full reversion to Zoe upon removal of Aaron from care. Real estate searches, deposit notes. He looked at the words for a moment. Then he wrote, not grief. Motive. He closed the notebook and went to pick up Aaron from school. She was standing at the edge of the pickup line with her backpack on, watching the cars. When she saw his truck, her face changed, a small, almost invisible relaxation, like someone had released a pressure valve just slightly. She climbed in without being asked and buckled her seatbelt and sat back. Good day, he said. Okay, she said. We drew pictures. What did you draw? She thought about it. A house with a dog. We don't have a dog. I know, she said. It was a pretend house. He drove them home through the flat Ohio streets, past bare-limbed trees and the low gray sky of early April. He did not say much. Neither did she, but she hummed a little as they drove, a soft, tuneless sound, and Daniel kept both hands steady on the wheel and filed everything away and kept his eyes on the road ahead. That night, he called his mother from the driveway, sitting in the truck with the engine off. He kept his voice quiet and factual. He asked her what she remembered about the weeks before Darren got sick, whether there had been anything unusual, whether Darren had seemed off in any way. His mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he was tired, more than usual. He said it was work. Did he mention it to the doctor? I don't know, she said. I didn't ask. A pause. Daniel, what are you thinking? I'm not thinking anything yet, he said. I'm just asking. He said good night and went inside. The following Monday, Zoe said she was going to work. She said this the way she said most things casually, without looking directly at anyone, addressing the air somewhere above the kitchen counter. She grabbed her keys off the hook by the door, told Aaron she'd be back by 4, and left. Daniel waited 5 minutes. Then he picked up his own keys. He left Aaron with Mrs. Tanner next door, an older woman who had known Darren since he was a boy and who had offered, more than once, to help with Aaron whenever Daniel needed it. She did not ask questions. He was grateful for that. He followed Zoe's car north on Route 16. She did not go to work. Zoe worked 3 days a week as a billing coordinator for a medical office 20 minutes from Ashford. It was a Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. This was a Monday. Daniel noted that. He kept 3 cars back and watched her turn into the parking lot of a motel called the Blue Ridge Inn, a low, flat building set back from the road behind a row of tired-looking pine trees. The sign had a light out on one end. The lot held 7 or 8 cars. He parked at the far end and watched. A man was already there. He was leaning against the railing outside room 14, a coffee cup in one hand, looking at his phone. He was broad-shouldered and unhurried-looking, in his late 30s, wearing a canvas jacket and work boots. The kind of man who looked like he had spent a long time being comfortable with himself. When Zoe pulled in, he straightened up. He watched her walk toward him with an expression Daniel could read even from 50 yards. Not love, exactly, but familiarity and something close to ownership. He knew her walk. He had been waiting. They went inside room 14. The door closed. Daniel sat in his truck. He took out his phone and captured a long shot of the motel, the car, the man in the jacket. Then he looked up the motel's registration office number, wrote it down, and sat with his hands folded in his lap and thought. He did not feel what he might have expected to feel. He was not surprised, exactly. He had sensed for weeks that Zoe had moved on from Darren's death in a way that was more complete than grief usually allows. There had been a lightness to her, occasionally, that sat wrong against the performance of widowhood. He had noted it without naming it. Now he was naming it. He was there for 2 hours. When the door to room 14 opened again, he had his phone ready. He caught them both clearly, her face, his face, the proximity between them in the frame of the doorway. The man's hand on the small of her back as she stepped out, her head tilting up toward him before she pulled away. He walked her to her car. They did not kiss in the open, but the way they moved around each other said everything. He did not confront them. He drove home, picked up Aaron from Mrs. Tanner's, and made dinner. And that night, when the house was quiet and Zoe was on her phone in the living room, Daniel sat in his room and looked up the man's license plate, which he had photographed in the parking lot. Through a contact he'd had since his 20s, a former private investigator named Otto, who now ran a small online record service and owed Daniel a favor from years back. The name came back the next morning. Jack Boone, 39, a contractor out of Millhaven, the next town over. No prior record. Divorced 2 years ago. Daniel added the name to the notebook. Then he sat back and thought about the timeline. Darren had been dead for 4 months. But it takes time to find someone, to build something, to develop the kind of comfort he had seen between them in that parking lot. This relationship had not started in the weeks after the funeral. It had started before. He added that to the notebook too. That same night, without planning to, he got the rest of what he needed. He had been in the backyard after dinner, standing in the cool air, trying to decompress after a long day of holding himself together. The kitchen window was open 3 inches. Voices drifted out. Zoe's voice first. I told you it takes time. I can't rush this. Then Jack Boone's voice, and Daniel went very still because he had not known Boone was in the house. You said once the kid's out, we're free. A pause. Zoe, I just need a handle clean. Daniel did not move for a long time after that. Handled. Clean. He pulled out his phone and hit record. He stood in the dark and held it steady, pointed at the open window, and listened to the rest of their conversation. Most of it was mundane, plans, complaints, logistics. Boone asking about timing. Zoe saying the lawyer was looking into it. Boone mentioning Columbus. Zoe saying she needed a few more weeks. But those 2 sentences were the ones that mattered. Those were the ones that could not be explained away. Back inside, after Jack Boone's headlights swept across the front windows and faded down the street, Daniel sat at his desk and looked at everything he had assembled. Photos, documents, A financial motive worth $400,000. A recording with two people discussing the removal of a child. A timeline that suggested this relationship predated Darren's death. A name. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at the desk. He pulled out the notebook and wrote a single line. Time to move. Daniel did not move carelessly. He had learned, watching his brother build a business and a family, that the most effective actions are the ones you prepare for properly. You do not swing at something without first making sure you can follow through. He started the day after recording the conversation. The first thing he did was call a lawyer. He did not use anyone local. Ashford was a small enough town that word traveled, and he needed to move without Zoe knowing. He drove 45 minutes to a firm in Westbrook, a larger town with enough foot traffic through its law offices that no one would remember him as anything unusual. The lawyer's name was Patricia Adler. She was in her mid-40s, direct without being cold, with a small, organized office and the kind of professional composure that came from years of sitting across from people in complicated situations. He told her everything. He laid it out in order: Darren's death, the trust, the clause, the affair, the recording, the overheard conversation in the kitchen, and the one he had recorded in the backyard. The real estate printouts. His mother's comment about Darren being tired. Patricia Adler listened without interrupting. She took notes on a legal pad in small, even handwriting. When he was done, she looked at him for a moment. "You have more evidence than most clients who walk in here," she said. "Is it enough?" "It's enough to start," she said. "What do you want the outcome to be?" "Full custody of my niece," Daniel said. "And I want Zoe investigated." Patricia nodded slowly. "I'll need copies of everything." He handed her the folder he had brought. She made copies while he sat in the chair and drank the coffee her assistant had brought and tried to feel something other than the steady, controlled pressure that had been sitting in his chest for weeks. He could not. Not yet. There was still too much to do. The next step was the bag. That evening, Daniel quietly assembled a small backpack for Erin. He put in 3 changes of clothes, her toothbrush, the stuffed rabbit she slept with, a photograph of Darren she kept on her bookshelf, and a few of her favorite books. He slid it under his own bed. He told himself he hoped he would never need it. He knew he might. He also called Mrs. Tanner. He did not tell her everything. He told her enough. He asked if she would be willing to take Erin at a moment's notice if something came up. She did not ask what something meant. She said yes without hesitation. Then he called Child Protective Services. He made the call from his truck, parked on a quiet street 3 blocks from the house. He spoke clearly and calmly. He told the caseworker about the overheard conversation and its content, about Erin telling him she had been told she might go somewhere far, about the financial structure that gave Zoe $400,000 if Erin was removed from her care. He said he had recordings, photographs, financial documents, and the child's own account of what she had been told. The caseworker asked him to come in. He had an appointment for the following morning. He went back to the house and made dinner. He and Erin ate at the kitchen table while Zoe was on her phone in the other room. They ate pasta with butter, Erin's preference, and she told him about a girl at school named Meg who could do a backflip on the playground. "Can Meg really do a backflip?" Daniel asked. "She tried," Erin said. "She mostly landed on her side. But almost." He laughed. The sound surprised him. It felt strange in his chest, too warm, too real, too human for the kind of controlled machinery he had been running for the past 2 weeks. "That counts," he said. Erin smiled. A real smile. Just for a second. The next morning, he went to the CPS office and gave them everything. The caseworkers moved faster than he had expected. Within 3 days, there were 2 visits to the house. Caseworkers in professional clothes who asked careful questions and observed with careful eyes. Zoe answered them smoothly. She was good at smooth. But Daniel watched her face when the second caseworker, a younger man named Garrett who had the quiet, unhurried manner of someone who had heard every version of every story, asked Erin to describe a typical day at home. Erin paused, and in that pause, Daniel saw something flicker in Zoe's expression. Not panic, not quite, but a crack in the composure, a small fracture running along the surface of all that careful performance. Erin said, carefully, "Sometimes it's fine. Sometimes I just stay in my room." Garrett wrote something down. He looked at Erin for a moment. "When you stay in your room, Is that because you want to or because you're asked to? Erin glanced at her mother, then back at Garrett. Both, she said. Something shifted in the room. It was not dramatic. No one reacted visibly. But Garrett wrote something else down, and Zoe went very still beside him, and Daniel sat in his chair and felt the ground move, just slightly, under Zoe's feet. That night, Zoe stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed and stared at Daniel across the counter. You called them, she said. He met her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. She held his gaze for a long moment. Her jaw was tight. Her voice, when she spoke again, had lost its usual smooth control. You're making a mistake, Daniel. I'm just worried about Erin, he said. Like I've always been. She made a sound, not quite a laugh, and turned away. She was losing control of the narrative. He could see it in the way she moved through the next few days, slightly too fast, slightly too precise. The yoga sessions got shorter. The phone calls with her mother got longer and lower, conducted in the bedroom with the door closed. Daniel kept watching. He kept adding to the notebook. He kept his face calm and his actions unremarkable. And he waited for the next move. Zoe moved first. Daniel should have expected it. He had expected it, on some level, but the speed of it still caught him off balance. 6 days after the second CPS visit, he received a call from Patricia Adler at 7 in the morning. Zoe has filed a complaint against you, Patricia said. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed. Through the wall, he could hear the small, ordinary sounds of the house waking up. The creak of floorboards, the distant sound of the shower. He focused on Patricia's voice. What kind of complaint? She's claiming you've been attempting to manipulate Erin in order to gain access to the estate. She's saying you're unstable, obsessive, and that your presence in the house has been harmful to her daughter. She's also saying your report to CPS was fabricated to cover your own financial motives. He was quiet for a moment. She moved fast. She has a lawyer too, Patricia said. Filed yesterday, and she's requested an emergency custody review. What does that mean for Erin? Patricia paused. Erin has been temporarily placed in state care while the review takes place. Standard procedure during contested investigations. I'm sorry, Daniel. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. He absorbed it. How long? Until the hearing. Could be 3 to 4 weeks. He thanked her and ended the call. He sat in the quiet bedroom for a moment and let himself feel it, the full, cold weight of it. Erin, in a house somewhere with strangers, sleeping in a room he had never seen, without the stuffed rabbit he had packed in the bag under his bed, without the familiar sounds of the house she had grown up in, without anyone she knew and trusted. He thought about her face in the doorway. I don't want to go. Then he set the feeling aside. He had learned to hold it and put it down, not to lose it, just to store it where it would not interfere with the work. He got dressed. He ate breakfast. He drove to Patricia Adler's office and spent the next 3 hours going over every piece of evidence they had. The hearing was scheduled for a Friday, 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Zoe remained in the Ashford house. Daniel moved into a rental unit downtown, a small, clean apartment on the second floor of a converted building with 2 windows overlooking the street. He unpacked his 2 duffel bags and his box of books and set up his desk and went to work. He called Patricia every day. He reviewed documents. He organized the financial evidence into a format the court could follow clearly. He wrote out a detailed, dated account of everything he had witnessed, every scene, every conversation, every overheard word, and had it notarized. He contacted the CPS caseworker, Garrett, who agreed to testify. He contacted Mrs. Tanner, who had witnessed the day Erin was found alone outside without a coat and was willing to say so. He ate poorly during those weeks. He slept in short intervals and woke too early, running through the case in his head in the dark. He called the foster care placement coordinator twice just to confirm Erin was okay. They told him she was stable. She was asking about her uncle, they said. That was the word that stayed with him. Stable. Not happy. Not fine. Stable. The word you use when someone is surviving rather than living. He thought about Darren. There was no evidence yet. Not real evidence. Not the kind that stood in a courtroom. But Daniel had stopped being able to ignore what sat at the back of his mind every time he looked at the insurance documents and the trust clause and the timeline. 38. Healthy. No family history of cardiac events. dead within 2 years of the trust being finalized. A girlfriend who had been comfortable enough with Boone, well before the funeral, to meet him at a motel in the middle of a weekday. He wrote it in the notebook without allowing himself to draw conclusions. But he wrote it. The hearing lasted just over 3 weeks. The courtroom was standard, wood paneling, fluorescent overhead lighting, the low hum of the ventilation system creating a constant background noise that Daniel became very familiar with over time. He sat beside Patricia every day in press clothes with his hands folded on the table and watched Zoe perform. And it was a performance. He had to give her that. She arrived each day in muted, careful clothing. Nothing too polished, nothing that said money, everything that said quietly bereaved. Her voice in testimony was soft and measured, with just enough break in it at the right moments to suggest grief she was doing her best to hold together. She described Daniel as someone who had inserted himself into the household, who had turned Aaron against her mother, who had filed a fraudulent CPS report out of jealousy over the estate. She answered questions with a kind of steady, reasonable sorrow that the courtroom might have found entirely convincing. If Daniel had not heard her in the kitchen that Thursday evening, if he had not stood in the dark backyard with his phone recording, if he had not spent 4 months paying close attention to a woman who had never expected anyone to watch her that carefully. Patricia built the case without theatrics. She was methodical the way Daniel was methodical, and he appreciated that. She did not try to make Zoe look like a monster. She let the evidence do that by itself. First, the financial structure. She presented the trust document, highlighted the clause, and walked the court through the numbers. $400,000 would transfer to Zoe in the event of Aaron's removal from her care. The judge, a gray-haired woman named Harmon who reviewed everything twice before she spoke, asked several precise questions and wrote notes without expression. Second, the affair. Patricia presented the photographs, Jack Boone's name, the timeline of the relationship, the motel receipts Daniel had obtained through Otto. She was careful not to make morality an argument. An affair, on its own, proved nothing in a custody hearing, but she used it to establish a pattern of deception and to introduce Boone's name before the audio was played. She also noted the timeline. The relationship showed signs of beginning before Darren's death. Zoe's lawyer objected. Harmon considered it and allowed the line of evidence to continue. Third, the recording. Patricia waited for a moment of stillness in the courtroom before she played it. The audio was clean. Daniel had been close enough to the window. The night had been quiet. Boone's voice first, then Zoe's voice coming through the speaker with perfect clarity. I just need it handled clean. The courtroom was quiet for a moment after the recording ended. Not dramatically quiet. No one gasped, no one stood. But there was a quality to the silence that was different from the silence before. Something in the air had shifted, and everyone in that room felt it. Daniel watched Zoe's face. She was sitting very still. Her hands were folded in front of her, and her expression had not changed. She was still wearing the look of careful, composed grief she had been wearing all morning. But something in her jaw had tightened. A small thing, almost nothing. The kind of thing you would only see if you had been watching her face for months. Her mask had cracked. Just enough. Fourth, Aaron's testimony. It was taken in a separate room, with a court-appointed advocate present, and the judge reviewed the recording rather than having Aaron testify directly in the courtroom. Daniel did not hear it live, but Patricia briefed him afterward, her voice careful and professional. Aaron had been calm. She had answered the questions clearly. She had described the house, her mother's behavior, the evenings she spent in her room alone, the night she was left outside without a coat. She had described the conversation in which she had been told she might go somewhere far. She had described going to her Uncle Daniel in the middle of the night. The advocate said she was remarkably composed, Patricia told him. But she cried when she described the night she came to your room. Daniel looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. What does Harmon think? I think we're close, Patricia said. But we're not done yet. He drove back to the apartment that evening and sat at his desk and looked at the notebook. He had not written in it for several days. He opened it to a clean page. He did not write anything. He sat with the pen in his hand and thought about Darren and about Aaron in a foster home, asking about her uncle and about the word stable. Then he closed the notebook and went to bed. Tomorrow, they would finish this. On the last Friday of the hearing, something happened that Daniel had not planned for. He had been careful in all his preparation to focus on what he could prove and control. He had not pushed the question of Darren's death, not formally, not officially. He had written it in the notebook. He had felt it in his bones. But he had no evidence, and without evidence, it was nothing but a brother's grief and suspicion. Someone else had been thinking the same thing. The CPS investigation had triggered a standard review of Darren's death records, a procedural step that Daniel had not known about, a thread that the county investigator had quietly begun pulling in the background. Dr. Renee Whitfield, a forensic pathologist contracted by the county medical examiner's office, had reviewed the original autopsy. She found an inconsistency in the cardiac findings that had not been noted at the time, a small irregularity in the tissue markers that was easy to overlook in an initial assessment, but significant enough under a targeted review to warrant further testing. She had ordered those tests. She had waited for the results. The results arrived during the last week of the hearing. Trace compounds in tissue samples. Compounds consistent with a class of substances that could, administered in low doses over an extended period, produce symptoms indistinguishable from cardiac failure in a healthy person. Slow-acting, subtle, not enough to raise flags in a standard autopsy, more than enough, under targeted testing, to be identified. Dr. Whitfield presented her findings to the court on a Thursday morning. She was measured and precise, the way scientists are when they understand the weight of what they are saying. She did not dramatize. She did not qualify unnecessarily. She explained what she had found, how she had found it, and what it was consistent with. Daniel sat at the table and listened and felt something enormous move through him. Not surprise, not exactly, but a kind of terrible relief. The thing he had felt in his chest since February, the thing he had not been able to name, was being named now by someone in a white coat with a degree from Ohio State and 20 years of forensic experience. Darren had not simply died. Someone had helped him get there. The courtroom went very quiet when Dr. Whitfield finished speaking. Judge Harmon reviewed the report without expression. Zoe's lawyer leaned toward her and said something in a low voice. Zoe did not respond. She sat with her hands folded on the table and her eyes on the surface in front of her, and she did not look at Daniel, not once, and he understood that she had known this moment might come. She had been hoping it would not. She had done everything she could to make sure it would not. It had come anyway. "Are you all right?" Patricia said quietly. "Keep going," Daniel said. The charges escalated within the hour. What had been a custody hearing was now something else entirely. The district attorney's office was notified. An investigator who had been present for Dr. Whitfield's testimony spoke quietly with the judge during a brief recess. There were procedural pauses, consultations in the hallway, paperwork being exchanged in low voices. Daniel sat at the table and held himself very still. When the hearing reconvened, Judge Harmon addressed the courtroom in a flat, measured voice. She granted permanent custody of Aaron to Daniel Cole. She ordered a full investigation into the financial conduct alleged in the case. And she suspended Zoe's legal rights pending the criminal investigation. It was the last part that Daniel watched most carefully. Zoe's lawyer stood and began to object, something about procedural timing, about the rights of the accused in a civil proceeding. But two investigators were already moving from the back of the courtroom, badges visible, and Zoe turned her head and watched them come and did not finish whatever sentence she had been about to start. She was taken into custody directly from the courthouse. No warning, no goodbye. She walked between the two investigators with her chin up and her face arranged into something that might have been defiance or might have been disbelief. The courtroom doors closed behind her, and she was gone. Daniel sat at the table for a moment after everyone else had begun to move. Patricia was beside him, gathering documents, speaking to another attorney in a low voice. Around them the room settled into the low noise of a session ending. Chairs scraping, papers rustling, voices dropping to normal. He thought about his brother. He thought about Darren at 25, calling him from the side of the road because he had a flat tire and no spare and could not stop laughing about it. He thought about Darren at Aaron's birth, standing in a hospital corridor with his hands in his pockets and the most unguarded expression Daniel had ever seen on his face. He thought about the last time they had spoken. A phone call, nothing extraordinary, the kind of conversation brothers have when they're both busy and expect to have more. He pressed his hands flat against the table. He breathed. Then he picked up his folder, pushed back his chair, and stood up. There was still one more thing to do. The new house was smaller than the one on Ferris Lane. It was a single-story rental on a quiet street on the east side of Ashford. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard with a wooden fence, an oak tree in the corner that was just beginning to show the first thin leaves of spring. Erin had chosen her room by standing in the doorway of each one and thinking carefully before she pointed to the one with the window that looked out at the oak tree. That one, she had said. Good choice, Daniel had said. She had started unpacking her things with a quiet seriousness, arranging her books on the shelf and placing the stuffed rabbit on the pillow. Daniel had bought her a new desk lamp with a warm light and set it up before she moved in. She had noticed it right away and said thank you in a voice that was a little less careful than the one she had used to say please and thank you in the old house. That was how it started. The months that followed were not simple. Nothing about healing was simple, and Daniel was honest enough with himself to know that Erin carried more than a 7-year-old should have to carry. The loss of her father, the slow confusion of the months before everything changed, the weeks in foster care, the strange ordeal of the hearing. She slept badly some nights. She still flinched sometimes when a door closed too hard. She still had moments of going very quiet and very still, the way she had learned to go quiet and still in the old house. She had 2 sessions a week with a child therapist named Dr. Kwan, a quiet woman with a calm office and a small aquarium near the window, who reported back to Daniel periodically with the kind of measured professional optimism that he had learned to read as genuine. She was doing the work. She was getting better. He watched for the signs, the way he had taught himself to watch for everything, carefully, without intrusion. He watched the way her sentences got longer, the way she started laughing more freely, not just the small rusty sound, but something fuller and more natural. The way she began to leave her shoes in the hallway, instead of always placing them precisely by the door. The way she started asking him questions. Real questions, curious ones, not the careful, self-protective questions of a child who has learned to be afraid of the answers. She asked about her father often. He answered honestly. He told her about the flat tire story. He told her about T-ball. He told her about the Sunday morning phone calls and the garden and the hospital corridor. He told her that her father had loved her more completely than anything else in his life. She listened to all of it carefully, and sometimes she cried, and sometimes she did not, and either way she seemed better afterward. He brought home a dog in September, a medium-sized brown mutt from the shelter in Westbrook, 2 years old, with an unremarkable face and an enormous personality. Erin named him Ford. He destroyed 2 pillows in his first week, and was thereafter forgiven for everything. Patricia Adler updated Daniel periodically through the year. The fraud charges against Zoe were confirmed. The financial records showed a pattern of mismanagement of the trust funds, as well as evidence of preparatory steps toward initiating an adoption process for Erin. Paperwork that had been started and then quietly abandoned after Daniel moved into the house. The real estate printouts, the deposit notes, the timeline, when laid out in sequence, told a story that was almost impossible to read charitably. The criminal investigation into Darren's death proceeded more slowly. Investigations like that always did. But Dr. Whitfield's findings held. The compounds identified in the tissue samples were consistent, in type and likely exposure period, with a deliberate, extended administration. The case was built carefully over months by a team of prosecutors who understood they would be arguing this in front of a jury and needed every detail to be airtight. Zoe was eventually charged with second-degree murder in connection with Darren's death, in addition to the fraud charges. Her lawyer entered a not guilty plea. Jack Boone cooperated with investigators. He provided a statement that he had known Zoe was planning to remove Erin from her care, but had not known the details of how. He claimed he had not understood what handled clean meant. The investigators assessed his statement without visible enthusiasm, but his cooperation earned him a deal. He was charged as a minor accessory and fined. He moved back to Millhaven and was not heard from again. Zoe received a preliminary sentence on the fraud charges while the murder trial was still pending. 3 years in state custody, with far more to follow once the larger case concluded. She would be behind bars for a very long time. Not enough to undo what had been done, but enough to stop her from ever doing it again. Daniel received this news on a Wednesday afternoon. He was in the backyard at the time, watching Erin throw a tennis ball for Ford, who retrieved it with great dedication and then dropped it somewhere other than her feet every single time. She was laughing, a real laugh, open and unself-conscious, the kind a child produces when they have been given enough safety to forget to be careful. Daniel stood at the back door with his phone in his hand and watched her and did not say anything for a long time. That evening, after dinner, after Ford had been walked and Erin had done her homework and the house had settled into its particular quiet, a real quiet, a safe quiet, nothing like the watchful silence of Ferris Lane, Erin looked up from her book and asked him something. "Uncle Daniel," she said. "Yeah." She thought for a moment. The question seemed to cost her something to form, the way real questions do. Why did she hate me? He did not answer immediately. He set down his own book and looked at her, at this child who had her father's careful eyes and her own particular courage, and found the words slowly. "She didn't hate you," he said. "Not exactly." Erin waited. She just cared more about money than she cared about people. And when you have to choose between money and people, and you choose wrong. He paused. You end up with neither. Erin absorbed this. She looked at the table for a moment, then back at him. There was something in her expression that was older than her years. Not hardness, not bitterness, but a quiet, clear-eyed understanding that some people carry from a very young age. The kind of children who have been through things that teach you early what the world can ask of you. "I know," she said, and from the certainty in her voice, he believed her. He picked up his book again. She picked up hers. Ford settled at her feet with a heavy, self-satisfied sigh. The lamp made its warm circle of light over the table. Outside, the last of the day's light was fading into a deep blue. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once. The oak tree in the backyard stood still against the evening sky. Daniel turned a page. This was what they had built from the wreckage. Not without cost, not without loss that could never be fully recovered, but real, steady, theirs. Zoe had chased something she had decided mattered more than the people around her. She had planned it carefully. She had nearly gotten away with it. And in the end, she had lost everything. The money, the house, the freedom, the future she had imagined. Some people destroy their own family chasing something that was never worth it. Zoe lost everything. And this time, no one was there to save her.